It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Someone who is heavily involved in a situation that requires courage, skill, or tenacity, as opposed to someone sitting on the sidelines and watching. There are those among us who dare to do more, and in so doing draw attention to themselves. Sometimes they win, and sometimes they come up short. But what they really enjoy is the fight, the striving to do better that's needed to accomplish great things. Welcome, everyone. I am Supreme Decisions, and this is the Supreme Decisions Legal Minute Podcast. Today, I wanted to start with the man in the mirror. Or, excuse me, not Michael Jackson, but the man in the arena. Reason being is what I am actually talking about or discussing is for the everyday man and woman that wants to fight, wants the satisfaction of knowing this is not right, I can do something about it. Because when you choose to fight, it is generally in the minority. 95% of all people never fight back. So when you're in that 5% that actually want to know, that 5% that actually want to go, the one that strives for more, for better, and for right. Now, I heard this morning someone said, I've never seen anyone that was an advocate not being persecuted. I was like, it was just dumbfounding, because it amazes me how when you give out something, as long as it's truthful, people have a problem with you. And even in doing so, it's generally part of the 95% who never want to fight back. Because in the instance of doing that, understanding one thing, they don't want you fighting back because they don't have the courage to fight back. They want you to be as bolden to sit still and be comfortable with whatever's going on while not having to justify their shortcomings. They're looking for you to be the excuse. Because if you're fighting back, you're succeeding. You're actually doing something different, something noble, something worthwhile. Once you succeed, they now have to explain why they aren't. Now, how does that pertain to law? We live in an adversarial system. There's this one rule in the Sixth Amendment, and it's fortified by the United States Constitution of America. It's witness confrontation. In the confrontation, it's like, I look at it, I used to call traffic citations. That's your contract to fight. When you have that court booking, because again, I'm a fight guy. Every Saturday, there's no need to look for me because I'm sitting on my behind, I'm watching a fight somewhere. And what happens is these fighters get contracts. They sign your name and your opposition. They also have a location and a date. This is when you start training. You have a training camp. Generally, it's 4 weeks or longer, depending on the type of sport that you're participating in. Well, law is the same way. Both sides have to come to an agreement to fight. Both sides have to agree to be adversaries. Both sides have the ability and should have the willingness to confront one another. But here's where the I guess the rubber meets the road, where the difference is made for the most part. When you're doing the confrontation, it goes into an understanding of what is confrontable. Because we have to understand, anybody that's levying an accusation against you, they are the ones that have to do the explaining. They are the ones that have to provide evidence of your wrongdoing or evidence to support their accusation. Now, today I'm going into something that comes from the Harvard Law Review, volume 122, section 276. And basically, I'm going to go through some cases. And in doing that, I'm hoping to give you a greater understanding when you are the man in the arena, when you are the one that's sitting up and fighting back. Because in 2004, the Supreme Court transformed the face of constitutional evidence law, holding that the Sixth Amendment's confrontation clause, that testimonial evidence from an unavailable witness could only be presented in court if. Remember, I go through the context of what can and can't be brought in, and then the biggest words in law. If, and, or. In this, it gives you when something can be allowed, because oftentimes we have a police officer, they're writing out something in their citation. They write out their police report. They're not coming in as a witness. They're coming in as an expert. Why? Because they are the ones that, quote unquote, know and are experts at law. Yet, they're coming in without actual firsthand knowledge of the law, but only statutes, codes, and ordinances, which are not able to have someone where you can openly confront them on. But they allow this because they call this testimonial evidence. Now, when it can be presented if the defendant has previously had an opportunity to confront that witness. These are generally done through deposition. This is also laid out in Crawford v. Washington. Now, many of us don't know of this case because I've only gone over it maybe 3 or 4 times in the past 3 or 4 years. But it is Crawford v. Washington, 541 U.S. 36, and again, 2004. But here's the thing. Crawford v. Washington provided previously little elaboration on what statements should be considered testimonial, or whether they were any exceptions to the requirement of confrontation. Now, I'm going to go back, because even in the midst of this, we're understanding there are exceptions to every rule. That's literally a saying. There are exceptions to the rule. We also understand there are exceptions to hearsay. But we also have to understand what those exceptions are and how they can be applied. That's where I'm coming in at. Because we all know what confrontation is. We all know where standing lies. Standing is only available to those that can address an injury directly evolving from the actions of the defendant or the accused. Understand that. There has to be actions that can be fairly traced from one individual to the actions of another. Because you remember, we talked about intent. There has to be actus reus. Uh-oh, there's that word again. Because again, people told me that's not right. Guilty act. There must be an act that causes an injury, either to one's person or to one's property, that can be addressed directly from the defendant, which a lot of times there's done through negligence, which is still an intentional act, which is done through intent, which is someone doing something deliberately. But when we talk about Crawford v. Washington, that is only a foundational case. And what happened, it resulted in many more questions being asked. And as a result, Crawford courts and scholars have been struggling to define the bounds of this newly rediscovered right, largely unaided by the Supreme Court. Many had questions left unanswered after Crawford. And what happens if the defendant forfeited his right to confrontation by intentionally making the witness unavailable? Now, the feds call this witness tampering, if someone is intentionally made to be unavailable. So it is a crime because you're doing a deliberate act. Oftentimes you hear of no snitching or intimidation. I can actually speak to a few times where I was aiding someone and literal police officers went in and intimidated people into not coming to court. Oftentimes those cases ended up being dismissed. Most times it was because the person itself was afraid to follow through. But then comes Giles v. California. Now that is a case that I think I've only spoken of one time. Because in Giles v. California, 128, Supreme Court 2678, and it's a 2008 case, the court answered this in the affirmation recognizing a forfeiture by wrongdoing exception to the confrontation clause when the defendant's intention in wrongfully causing the witness absent was to prevent testimony. Here's where it gets kind of sketchy. Because when you're doing forfeited by wrongdoing, that is the exception to the Sixth Amendment right of criminal defendants to confront the witnesses against them. And under the federal rules of evidence, a statement made by a declarant that normally qualifies as hearsay would therefore not be admissible, can be admitted under the forfeiture by wrongdoing exception to the hearsay rule. So, here's the crazy part. What if the defendant is not the one making the witness unavailable? This is why we have these things called criminal removals. Now, I know a lot of people told me that you can't do a federal removal under a civil rights violation if it's not a civil right. You can't remove a criminal case. Well, I'm going to say something crazy to you. In the next couple of days, probably by the time you hear this podcast, there will be videos up that actually supports what I'm saying. And this is something that was written not in 2000, but in 1990 something. So again, it's nothing new. It's been on the book for years. But because most people don't know, they think it's untrue. Now, what I'm speaking about is the party who wants hearsay evidence admitted under this exception. They must prove the opposing party's wrongdoing by a preponderance of evidence. And I'm going to say that one more time, because I want you to understand words have power. I think y'all remember that video from 4 years ago. Words have power. The party who wants hearsay evidence admitted. It doesn't say the defendant. It doesn't say the accused. It says the party. There are two parties to each case: the accused and the accuser. So who wants the evidence admitted under this exception must prove the opposing party's wrongdoing by a preponderance of that evidence. Now, a lot of times what this equates to, if it's the prosecution, it amounts to Brady violations. Because a lot of times you have, and I've actually seen this more often than not, that you don't have a complete request for discovery, or you don't have a detailed request for discovery. So in the midst of doing that, you now don't have everything that's needed, and the prosecutor is holding something. And even in, just to give you an example, one of the things that was done throughout our trial was the fact that there were several people that were quote-unquote witnesses. And I felt that there were a few people that the state left off their witness list. I did something just to see the response. I actually subpoenaed several witnesses that the state did not actually add to their witness list. And me, I sent a copy of it to them. Like, oops, my bad, didn't mean to send that to you, but here it is. Here's my witness list. What that did, it actually caused the state to change their line of questioning. It also changed what they were doing in order to actually prosecute myself and my two brothers. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times this is a strategical move, but it's done just to see it's almost like someone is sitting out and they're saying, you know what? I'm not going to show you my hand. And then when you do show your hand, it becomes a cause and effect type situation. So understanding when you're putting these things together, it's not always what's in front of you. Sometimes it's things that are not seen, and you have to be aware of that. Now, the next part of the confrontation clause is the defendant's intention. And in this manner, it's not talking about the person who's actually on the defense. The context is in the defendant will be the person that's being accused of the wrongdoing. So when the defendant's intention in wrongfully causing the witness's absence was to prevent testimony, in declining to specifically specify the standard of proof judges should require to find intent. Actus reus. Say that one more time. In declining to specify the standard of proof, judges should require to find intent. Now, when we talk about actus reus, mens rea, and corpus delicti. Those are the three elements of a crime. If you're looking even in state statutes, you will hear the word intent more often than not. Intent, intent, intent. Because there is no crime without intent. The reason why we're looking at all these court cases that are being made more public now, simply because more eyes are on certain things, because more people are interested in not necessarily certain people, but certain cases. We're starting to see the evolution of why prosecutors lose more than 70% of their cases, because they have a difficult time proving intent, because the action is dealing with how someone is thinking. There are very few Dionne Warwicks out here. There are very few mind readers. But here's the more difficult part of even that. Not only is it a requirement of the reading of someone's mind, but it's also to read that person's mind and then relay that message to 12 people. And get those 12 people to agree on what it is you see. I'm going to say that one more time. Not only is it reading someone's mind, it's understanding and then relaying that to 12 people. Then getting those 12 people to agree with your vision. If you are the accuser. Human nature doesn't allow generally 12 people that don't want to be somewhere to sit somewhere trapped and not come into some form of discord. Because many of us have gone to family reunions and we can't get 12 people in our family to agree with us. And they have free will. They have free reign. They have free roam. But now you're asking 12 strangers, don't know each other, probably don't like each other, don't want to be in the situation, and don't want to be in the place they're in. Now you're asking them to agree in one accord while you're reading someone's mind and painting that picture. Now, I know it seems like I've gotten off a little bit, but it's the understanding that the problem is understanding it starts with the willingness to fight back. Man only has the right he will defend. I've said this several times, but in the same context, is understanding that in those willingness to defend and becoming the man in the arena, there are going to be people that tell you, don't do that. You shouldn't do that because of this. You shouldn't do that because of that. Now, a lot of times when I first started doing this, I actually like, why is this little hating bastard doing this? But at the end of the day, I grew an understanding of they're doing it with sincerity most of the time because they can't see themselves fighting back. They can't see themselves confronting those that are standing in front of them. They can't see themselves as the man in the arena because they're thinking they don't have an ability not only to fight, but to fight and win. They only have an idea what the right and wrong is. They have very little context other than the programming that tells them what it is that they can or can't do. Now, understanding that Crawford allowed for a reshaping of the confrontation landscape, but the ideals remain the same because the confrontation clause is proposed to assess the reliability of testimony. You heard me talk about a couple weeks back. Police character on trial. Because that's one of the things in the confrontation clause. Because I've always told people this. And it's the funniest thing ever, because it's one lie can destroy 1,000 truths. One wrongdoing, people are judged by that one wrong act their entire life. Because many of us can actually relate to the fact that we've left our cities. We've gone out and made a life for ourselves, and we come back to visit, and everybody go, "Oh, there's little such and such. Boy, I remember when you was out there stealing in the grocery store. Oh, I remember when you hit little Johnny with the bat. I remember when you did this or you did that." They don't care about that you've gone on to college. They don't care about that you've gotten married and have children. They don't care that you built a life somewhere else. They care about that one wrong act you did in that one moment. Because even like I talked about with my son, they don't call you slaves no more. They call you criminal because it's easier. It's easier to identify as a criminal than to identify you as a human being just because you had on an orange jumpsuit, even though you weren't convicted. It's easier to look at you as something less than human. But understanding the context. When you're looking and you're going out and you're doing these things, people that you believe should be on your side, people that you believe should be willing to listen, should be willing to fight back, generally aren't. Because it's not built or made for everyone to fight back. Our system, whether we like it or not, is our system, and it's designed to work the way it is. And in this, it's the next level of understanding. It's lonely to stand there. I often tell people that I'm helping. At some point, you have to look the devil in the eye. You have to be able and willing to look the devil in the eye, because the paperwork can't speak for itself. The paperwork is only amendments or addendums to the contract. Because how the young boy said, you still got to come see me. When they give it to you, you still got to go see them. Now, today is actually just going to be real quick. But I want you to understand one thing. Don't expect everybody to be able or willing to go on the journeys that you go on simply because you're going on it. Don't think everyone's going to be a part of your victory just because you think they should, because you're being truthful, you're being honorable, you're actually fighting for something that's bigger than yourself. Everybody's not going to be there with you. When you look at one of my favorite movies, and it's the 300. One part of the 300, Maximus stood in the arena. It was him and one other gladiator. I've even used the context and looking at it in that form as becoming a monster in that stage, because Maximus became a monster because he was a soldier. Maximus was a soldier, but he had to become a monster because it wasn't only his life he was fighting for. He was fighting for the lives of the people. In order to beat the monster that we look at, as our system, in order to make changes to this monster that we're looking at as our system. We have to be willing to become a monster. Because I even talked about this with Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman went to go and pretty much get into a fight, for lack of a better term. But in the context of her fight, she had no idea what she was fighting with, and she understood understanding how powerful she was. She had a weapon, and she referred to it as the God Killer. When that weapon was taken away from her, just like a lot of us look at that paperwork, this is the paperwork that was going to slay the gods. Because this paperwork is so powerful. When that weapon was taken from her, she lost all confidence. Her opposition, the person she was confronting, her adversary, laughed at her. Because it's not the paperwork. And he told her, that's not the weapon that can beat me. You are the God Killer. You are the man in the arena. You are the one that can defeat the monster that you are confronting. You have the ability to beat your adversary. Because it's not our light that we most fear. Well, excuse me. It's not our darkness that we most fear. It is our light. So when I'm giving you these poems that I'm reading, they come from a different place. It ties into everything that I talk about. Because while it seems like I'm speaking in circles a lot of times, or like it doesn't make a full connection then, but now as we go along and it evolves, it becomes something different. You have to become something different to even understand it. So do not be afraid to be the man in the arena. Do not be afraid from outside ridicule. Do not be afraid to speak your truth.